Good evening, and we're really delighted to be able to present the Book of Gold, the Kanchana Chitra Ramayana of Banaras, a publication that was presented alongside an exhibition of the same name at the Museum of Art and Photography in Bengaluru. For the first time ever, 75 folios from this exquisite manuscript are on display with the public. But before I go any further, I'd like to take a moment to remember Kavita Singh, who co-edited and co-curated the exhibition along with Parul Singh. Kavita was a dear friend and a mentor of MAP, and she was an outstanding historian. Many students who have studied at the School of Art and Aesthetics at JNU have actually enjoyed the privilege of her guidance, and Parul, who co-curated it with her, was one of her students. Sadly, we lost Kavita just a month before the exhibition opened, but she spent the last year building this wonderful narrative for us, and in fact, she finished the last label just 3 or 4 days before she died. We miss her terribly, as I'm sure many of you do who knew her. So what is the Book of Gold? It was a manuscript that was commissioned by Udit Narayan, the king of Banaras, in 1796, so the late 18th century. 1,100 pages of Tulsi's Ramayana, which was written in the 16th century. And it had 548 exquisite illustrations with an equal amount of text that it talked about. And the interlocutor, there are 4, but the main narrator of this story is a character called Kaka Bushi, the sage who was cursed to be a crow for 1,000 lives. And it's rather surprising. This was a lavish project. Huge amounts of gold were used. It cost about 1,60,000 in those days. Why would a king who had just come into power decide that this would be his first major project? And then we find that in the previous year, his predecessor had been stripped of all his powers, Mahip Singh. He could not mint money, he could not maintain an army, could not build fortifications. So what does a new king do to establish his authority with his subjects? He uses religion and culture. And Kaka Bushi I was talking about is on the right side. There you can see him telling the story to Garud. So this is a time when the Mughal Empire is crumbling. The Hindu kingdoms are jostling for power. And that is when the figure of Ram emerges as an ideal ruler who provides a model for righteous rule. And so the Ram cult is revived, including patronage of the different sites that he's associated with. And there are many versions of the Ramayana, but Tulsi's Ramayana actually is quite a departure from the classical text that is written by Valmiki, because Tulsi writes in Awadhi, which is the language of the people, so he makes this much more accessible, whereas Valmiki wrote in Sanskrit. Another quite significant difference is that while Tulsi believes essentially in the divine form of Ram, even in his earthly form, whereas Valmiki sees him as a human being, an exemplary human being, but a human being nevertheless. And in that folio, you actually see Ram revealing himself to Kaka Bushi in his cosmic form. As I said, this was a lavish project with hundreds of artists being called from all over North India, because this took 18 years to complete. So there are, and it's quite interesting to see these different schools of artists, because there are distinctive styles. And in some cases, you will see multiple styles reflected in one folio. For example, the one on your left, that's a combination of Murshidabad, Awadh, and Jaipur. And there were other schools as well from Datia, from Delhi, all of them coming in together. And if you see, the architectural details here are quite important. They predominate the scene. And you can also see perspective that arrives in the miniature paintings. And the figures are almost an afterthought, as if they've been inserted into the landscape. And since this was really a hub of creative activity with all these artists being called in, Kavita actually, the argument that she puts forward in this publication is that while it was commonly believed that Indian miniature painting was deteriorating from the middle of the 18th century up to the mid-19th century, this manuscript proves quite the contrary. And that, in fact, where there was patronage, the Indian miniature tradition was actually flourishing. The book is designed by Sharna Dastur, and unfortunately, she couldn't be with us this evening. But I spoke to her, and she said that the impulse while designing the book was really to create an experience that attempted to relate the complexity and the stunning beauty of the illustrated folios, as well as the multiple layers of stories that they held within them. So a space in which the viewers could both experience the paintings for themselves, as well as read it through the eyes of the scholars. So the design was really about creating a framework for viewing, rather than calling attention to itself. And finally, this book brings together a great amount of writing and research. There are 6 essays that are written by scholars from different parts of the world. In her introductory essay, Kavita Singh really raises questions about the historical, the literary, and the artistic context within which the Chitra Ramayana was crafted. Philip Lutgendorf looks at the Ramayana of Banaras as a living text, reflected and affected by social context. Parul Singh highlights the previous attempts made to illustrate this manuscript, as well as other Ram Kathas. And Hiryun Shin discusses all the architectural projects that were undertaken by this Narayan dynasty, through which they were trying to forge a distinct identity and an alternate sacrality. You have Anjan Chakravarti, who pieces together the history of art patronage by this newly established royal line. And finally, Richard Schechner, the scholar who has videoed a lot of the Ram Leela performances. He contrasts the two of the great commentaries on the Ramcharitrammanas, the Ram Leela, which was created as for popular consumption, as against the manuscript that was created for an elite kind of group. So we end with a detailed note on style, and this is accompanied by these stunning imagery productions, which really give you an idea of just how rich the tradition of North Indian painting was during that time. I promise you an exhilarating read, and I hope that inspires many of you to actually come and see the original folios that are on display at MAP. But I'm now going to chat with Philip. So there's still quite an element of mystery that surrounds the Ramcharitrammanas. For 200 years, it lay in the library of the Ramnagar fort, and then suddenly the whole manuscript was pulled apart and it was dispersed across the country. So we're still tracking down who has the folios. Nobody's very sure. So why don't you tell us about how you got involved in the project and your encounters with the manuscript?
So I first heard of this manuscript in 1982 when I was studying Ramcharitmanas performance in Banaras for what would become a book called The Life of a Text. And I was interviewing the then Maharaja of Vibhuti Narayan Singh, and he told me that his ancestor, Udit Narayan, had sponsored 3 commentaries on the Tulsi Ramayana. A written commentary by a great Ramayani, a great traditional scholar connected with the court. This illustrated Kanchana Chitra Ramayana, and then the performed Ram Leela. And he stressed to me, the one thing that I remember that he stressed to me, because I wasn't interested in art history at that point. I was studying performance. But he said to me, the Kanchana Ramayana is not just an illustrated Ramayana, it is a tika. It is a drishya tika, a visible commentary on the Ramcharitmanas. And I thought that was very interesting, and I put that into my book. But I never saw it. He didn't offer to show it to me. And I went on from there. In 1999, I happened to be accompanying a team of videographers who were making a documentary on Tulsidas for television, and they were given permission to see one of the volumes. There were 7 volumes originally of this, one for each Kand in the Manas. And they were given permission to unwrap one in the library and photograph several of the pages. And I was with them. I was a talking head on camera. And so that was the only time I got to see it. And I saw a few pages, and I could see that the paintings were amazing. But again, I'm not an art historian. It wasn't what I was doing. Then in 2021, Kavita Singh contacted me in an email and said, "Have you ever heard of this work? And do you know that it is being dispersed?" And I'm not being an art historian, I didn't even know initially what that meant. But when I realized what it meant, I was, of course, horrified. On the other hand, I reflected on the fact that this had been wrapped up for 200 years in a private library and nobody had been allowed to see it. So I thought, well, at least now somebody will have a chance to see it. Anyway, Kavita asked me if I would be interested in working with her and her assistant, Parul Singh, on this, and I jumped at the opportunity. And the way I was able to help them was that these were bound into folios. And so each painting has a page of Ramcharitmanas text on the back of it, but that text is not the text that goes with the painting. Yeah. It goes with the next painting, because the text would have been on the left and the painting on the right. And since the folios were dispersed and they were kind of randomly mixed up, they had no way of knowing what the text was that went with the painting. And for me, it was relatively easy. The calligraphy is very beautiful. It's a beautiful Devanagari script. So it was easy for me to read and figure out what was on the back, and then I could just extrapolate backwards 2 or 3 stanzas and figure out what would have been facing each painting. And in that way, I was able to save the art historians some time. And because as it turned out, Kavita was under treatment, but she was really dying of cancer. And so it was great that I was able to help her a little bit to get a handle on what was going on in the paintings.
Yeah. So Tulsi actually was writing about the divine hero Ram, which is an avatar of Vishnu. But he was writing in Banaras, which is really the city of Shiva. So how did he actually negotiate the political complications that must have been emerging from that?
Well, and Shiva also is represented by a very powerful traditional Brahmanical knowledge group and worship group in Benares. And we know from other writings of Tulsidas that he was not always on good terms with these folks. And so one of the things he did in the Manas is to make Shiva Shiva is the main narrator. Kaka Bushi is an important narrator, but Shiva is the main narrator. He's telling the story of Ram to Parvati in answer to a question that she's asked him. And so, Shiva comes in and out of the story periodically, and he's constantly extolling the greatness of Ram. And then Ram, within the story, often extols the greatness of Shiva and, says, you can't love me if you don't worship Shiva. So, it's a kind of noblesse oblige between these two great gods. And Shiva is a little bit, in Tulsi's ideology, Shiva is a little bit subservient to Ram, but Ram pays him the highest respect throughout.
Okay. So since we're talking about the main narrator of the whole manuscript, I thought it would be interesting for you to tell us about Kaka Bushi, this sage who is cursed to be a crow for 1,000 lives. Not many of us know too much about Kaka Bushi, so it would be great for you to sort of build up this character and help us understand him.
Yeah, well, he is. There are four narrators in the Ramcharitmanas, and one of the things I always like to stress for people who aren't familiar with the text is this is one of the first postmodern epics. It's told from multiple points of view. You have these four narrators who keep coming in and out of the story, and there isn't a single perspective that's represented. Kaka Bushi comes in book 3 briefly, narrating, giving little quips, little asides on the story. But he really comes into his own in the last Kand, Uttarkand, book 7, and where he really becomes the main, there he is the main narrator. He's a fascinating, book 7 is the last one that I translated. It came out last year for the Murti series. And I say that Kaka Bushi became my new BFF, leading up to that, because I thought a lot about him, and I've written a fair bit about him in the introduction to that volume. He's a very fascinating character. He becomes the untouchable among the Dalit, as it were, among birds. The Pakshi Chandal is what he's called in the story. He's cursed to become the untouchable among birds. And yet he's exalted as, the greatest devotee of Ram. Shiva himself goes to Kaka Bushi and takes the form of a bird, a hamsa, a wild Himalayan goose, in order to hear the story of Ram from Kaka Bushi, because his katha is so beautiful. And then he sends Garuda to Kaka Bushi when Garuda has a doubt about Ram's divinity. And he says, well, you're a bird and he's a bird, and, he can clear it up for you. I should say in the show and in the book, if you have a chance to look at it, the paintings, they have a lot of paintings from Uttarakhand and of the Kaka Bushi Garuda Samvad, the dialogue. And the artists clearly had a lot of fun with him. And the museum has an extraordinary video installation, as well as the paintings that was done by, tell me who? The name of the video artist who did that? The video gallery where they have an animation?
Yes, Amit Datta.
Amit
Datta, the filmmaker, actually animates some of the paintings for us, and it's quite exquisite to watch.
Yeah.
So it gives people an alternate way of accessing the work as well.
And Kaka Bushi and Garuda are very much featured in these video panels, and I was just wonderstruck. Let me just say, Kamini, and this is not scripted, but if anybody here has a chance to go to Bangalore before March 6th, please don't miss this show. It is amazing. I saw it in October. I'm going to go again with my wife after the festival. But it is, reviewers these days throw around words like stunning and astonishing a lot. But I was blown away. And I had seen scans of these. The museum had sent them to me. Kavita had sent them to me. But nothing prepared me for the incredible detail, the opulence, the gold, you'll have paintings with a couple of hundred figures in it, and they're all different. Their faces, their expressions, their clothes. The work that went into this manuscript is absolutely astonishing. And the exhibit is so beautifully done. So see it if you can. Otherwise, this catalog is a very beautiful piece of work as well.
Philip is an honorary member of our marketing team. Okay, so I thought it would be good, Phil, to talk about the Ram Leela that was developed alongside the manuscript that was commissioned. So both went sort of hand in hand as a kind of political strategy, because what the king was really trying to do was to, merge these two landscapes. The landscape of Ramnagar with the landscape of Ayodhya. Quite an interesting political strategy, so I really want you to talk about that.
Yeah, well, kings like to associate themselves with Ram. Don't we all kind of know that? Yeah. Um, the Banaras rulers, in a way, some of what we've seen in the last week or so has been very traditional in a certain sense. Anyway, the Banaras rulers were very much, on the one hand, it was a political gesture, it was a strategic gesture, that's clear. On the other hand, they were really immersed in this text. They were truly passionate about it. There's no doubt about that. They loved it. They loved it as poetry. They loved it as song. And the Ram Leela, which had existed before this time, but as a much smaller thing, the Maharaja transformed into what the Ramnagar Ram Leela is today, which is a 30 or 31 day outdoor
Pageant, yeah.
extravaganza spectacle pageant. Think of, if you know the German Oberammergau passion play or something like that, except it's outdoors and it's environmental and it moves around from location to location. And their whole capital city, Ramnagar, was transformed into a gigantic set with permanent sites that were named for places in the Ramayana, Janakpur, Chitrakoot, Lanka, etc. And they became known by those names permanently. And the audience moves around from night to night. And my whole introduction to Ramcharitmanas performance in 1982 was attending the Ram Leela for 31 nights in October of 1982. And it was absolutely amazing. The cliche, it changed my life. But it really did. And over the centuries, it's changed a lot of people's lives because you step into a kind of alternative reality for a month. If you attend every night, as some people do, and it's amazing.
And also, what's very interesting to see, Philip, if you remember, in the folios, it celebrates Ram Raja, and the figure of Ram looks surprisingly like Udit Narayan. And the city of Ayodhya looks very much like Ramnagar with the Ramnagar flag. So it's quite interesting to see that parallel drawn. But very quickly, one last question: could you talk about the title that Tulsi chose for this manuscript, Ramcharitmanas, the sacred lake of Ram's deeds?
The Manas is, of course, the Manasarovar, the sacred lake near Mount Kailash in the Himalayas. Charit is the exemplary deeds, so it's the sacred Manas lake of the exemplary deeds of Ram. It's a cumbersome title in English, that's why ultimately the Murti series went with the Epic of Ram, which, I like. But Tulsi's very explicit about his title, and in his introductory section in Balkhand, he explains it. He gives an elaborate allegory of how his story is like this great sacred reservoir in the Himalayas. And there are 4 ghats, which are the 4 dialogues. And each ghat has 7 steps, which are the 7 khans. And so, the deeds of Ram are likened to a profound sacred reservoir into which you descend through the poem to bathe, to take a dubki, in the waters. And the narrators are sitting on the 4 sides of the lake, looking into it and seeing it from different perspectives, right? Darshan in Sanskrit and Hindi means seeing, but it also means a point of view, a perspective, and that's why philosophy is called darshana. So anyway, it's a wonderful title and very inspired.
I think that's a lovely point to end it at, Phil. Thank you very much.